January 1946. The early morning air outside Manila is sharp and heavy, a stillness breaking only with the gravel crunch of a battered army truck. Inside sit 12 Japanese women, silhouettes bent inward for warmth and uncertain comfort, faces marked by exhaustion and stoic dread. They have survived months in hiding, surrender, and the crushing rituals of defeat. For most, the humiliation of capture is not just a matter of military failure. It is a fracture of personal, familial, and national identity. Hands folded, eyes drifting down, each remains locked in thought, haunted by the distance from home and the weight of new regimes, shaping their fate. The truck rattles to its stop at the wire-bound edge of a sprawling POW compound, a place that is neither truly prison nor sanctuary. American MPs move with practiced efficiency, unslinging rifles, opening gates, and calling out instructions. Their tone is not cruel or sharp, but measured, tireless, a protocol born from months of occupation and the logistics of post-war management. "This way, ladies," the lead MP says softly, guiding the women down from the truck, boots slipping on frost and damp stone. Around them, the camp stirs. Allied soldiers, Filipino staff, Red Cross nurses gathering rations and preparing a modest breakfast drawn from thin supply lines. The kitchen aromas, boiled potatoes, bread, a faint whiff of coffee, float over the compound, mingling with the dust kicked up by morning movements. In the compound, the sense of newness is everywhere. Some of the Japanese women scan the landscape for anything familiar. A banner, a whispered phrase in their own tongue, a glimpse of hierarchy. What they find instead is a collage of unfamiliar routines, Allied troops joking with kitchen staff, nurses moving easily beside engineers, Red Cross volunteers lugging tin kettles and bread trays across open ground. Everything is informal, unhurried, bracingly egalitarian. The order which once governed their world, where rank, gender, and duty patterned every meal, every greeting, is nowhere in sight. Led by a Red Cross nurse, the women file toward the central mess hall. Eyes flick nervously to every side, seeking the invisible boundaries their own upbringing taught them. Instead, the hall is a broad, open space where soldiers and civilians, men and women, different ranks and nationalities, all sit together. The tables are simple, tin plates stacked, tea poured, conversations abuzz in English, Tagalog, and hesitant Japanese. Allied nurses exchange stories with American MPs. Filipino cooks joke quietly with chaplains. There is no division by rank, no ritual separation of men from women, no markers of superiority, at least none that the women can discern. For a moment, the Japanese group halts, caught at the threshold of the mess, unsure whether to cross, unsure whether their presence will disrupt or offend. Their leader, herself only a year removed from her post as an Imperial Army nurse, searches for guidance and finds none. The Allied nurse inviting them in does so with a gentle gesture and a reassuring glance. The women step forward, uncertain, backs straight with tension, and find their places at the communal table. Their hands remain folded, palms pressed tight, waiting for instruction about how to proceed. The first moments at the table unfold in near silence. Each woman receives a plate, plain boiled rice, bread, a cup of weak tea. The American nurse smiles, pours tea, and says, "Please eat." The response is a hesitant bow, eyes still lowered, habits holding fast. Each move measured as though watched by officers of the old regime. But minutes pass, and the forced awkwardness is broken by a cook who asks, in careful Japanese, "How is the rice?" Whispers of oishi, delicious, ripple among the group, and a shy gratitude is exchanged. Food, for so long rationed and weaponized, becomes a bridge across silence. Older prisoners follow the structures they remember, bowing before eating, praying quietly, waiting for elders to begin. Younger women, emboldened by the scene, look around and gradually copy new habits, sipping tea in rhythm with the nurses, passing plates without concern for rank. Conversation flickers hesitantly. Questions about weather, food, customs, anxiety fades, replaced by the distracting necessity of nourishment, and the subtle encouragement of Allied staff who refill cups and share small jokes about the blandness of rations. Days begin to layer, routines repeating. The women adapt, sometimes with reluctance, to being served at the table alongside men and women of every station. The mess hall noises, laughter, greetings, prayers, become less foreign. Each encounter softens the edges of discipline learned in their youth. Guards worry less about order and more about recovery. Doctors, observing the change, note that communal meals now bring faster psychological adjustment, fewer instances of grief and isolation, and a gradual willingness to accept life after defeat. The shock of seeing men and women eat together, once a symbol of the collapse of old Japan, shifts meaning in the daily routine. It becomes less a threat and more a changing tide. Surrender consequences lived in real time, faith in dignity found through shared bread, and small gestures of patience. Women who clung to ritual find space for questions and sometimes even laughter at the table. The mess, a place of nerves and unfamiliarity, now shelters slow, day-by-day transformation, a tissue of new relationships and survival stitched in the rhythms of morning, noon, and night. The world outside that camp is one of raw transition, its every routine haunted by the ghosts of violence and vast social rupture. Pacific Asia, in the aftermath of surrender, is a living montage of ruined cities, battered villages, and dispersed populations still running on the nervous energy of war. American, British, and Commonwealth soldiers, exhausted by years of tropical campaigns, manage not only occupation and repatriation, but also the ceaseless challenge of rendering humanity from former antagonists. In the Philippines, Allied Command faces daily reminders of the trauma endured by locals at the hands of both occupier and liberator. Yet behind the wire of hastily built camps, the emphasis shifts to a different question: how to balance discipline, order, and decency across an unpredictable spectrum of cultural and personal shock. For the Allied staff, Americans, British, Australians, and especially Filipino administrators, there is a strong adherence, at least outwardly, to the codes set by the Geneva Convention and the practicalities of daily camp life. Their briefings, shaped by the latest learnings from previous months, stress efficiency and procedural fairness. But day-to-day interactions reveal a more complex dynamic: pragmatism, subtle gestures of empathy, and a sense that the only peace to be found is in the steady repetition of manageable, civilizing routines. Filipino staff, their own war wounds barely healed, bring a mix of stoicism and reserved sympathy to their roles, treating even former enemy prisoners with fundamental respect. For doctors and Red Cross workers, decency means ensuring hygiene, food, and dignity, even or especially when the faces they serve are those of recent adversaries. Against this backdrop, Japanese culture clings fiercely to its old forms. The doctrine of imperial order lives on in every POW, in the structured way groups organize for meals, and in the stubborn silences and private rituals that animate communal dormitories. It is not unusual for the eldest woman in a dormitory to gently enforce morning bows, to murmur prayers, or to ensure that the group keeps to its ingrained hierarchies, even when no officers remain. Some of the rituals are a defense, a bulwark against the obliteration of self, a way to mark time and preserve memory. Yet around them, Allied expectations sweep away boundaries with a kind of practical, deliberate disregard. The first and most jarring collision comes quite literally at the breakfast table. Japanese women who file in expecting separation by gender and rank are greeted by the unself-conscious egalitarianism of Allied mess halls. Soldiers, nurses, engineers, administrative clerks, and cooks all mingling in the same open space. The result is an atmosphere equal parts noisy and restorative, far removed from the chill of military formality. No commander stands for a speech. No women are summoned to stand apart. Instead, meals unfold as a weaving together of voices, laughter, and everyday complaints about rations or sleep. It is within this mess hall, a roofed enclosure, where sunlight filters through gaps in the tin and walls, echo with linguistic blends from 3 continents, that the full strangeness of the New World impresses itself on every Japanese prisoner. The young, at first fearful and obedient, soon become curious. Older prisoners, holding tight to the etiquette that shaped their lives, find these routines alternately disorienting and heartbreaking. To lose the rituals of hierarchy, the clear lines separating men from women, officers from NCOs, is to lose something of the order that, for better or worse, provided meaning even amid war. Into this space, Red Cross and Filipino workers bring deliberate warmth. A Filipino nurse might ask about a Japanese child's name, or an Australian orderly pour extra tea and grin, encouraging the prisoners to eat more, speaking a few halting words of Japanese. These small acts shift the dynamic. Within weeks, silent meals give way to cautious conversation. Stories of home and family, quietly shared in broken English or careful Tagalog, begin to replace silence and suspicion. There are, inevitably, moments of grief. A Japanese nurse discovers news of a lost parent. A young prisoner receives a parcel from a vanished home. A Filipino staff member breaks down remembering lost friends. But these episodes, rather than restoring the barriers of war, frequently become the basis for mutual recognition. In these sorrows, the fact of shared humanity cuts through the battered edges of memory and command. As the weeks go by, the transformations deepen, but they are more than surface adaptation. Japanese women prisoners who once treated food as a rationed, sacred resource learn to accept seconds, to trade bread for rice, to share with neighbors. A sense of fellowship, tentative but real, builds around the table. Small rituals of the mess, waiting for everyone to be served, raising cups in a gesture of health, replace the prescribed stratifications of the old order. Nurses and prisoners work together in the camp infirmary, language barriers melting under the pressure of common endeavor. For the Allied staff, this feels like gradual vindication of a certain philosophy. They see that breaking bread together daily can accomplish what officers and pamphlets alone cannot. It undercuts the poison of old hatreds, replaces suspicion with routine, forges bonds of memory out of habit and kindness. Each morning begins the same. A bell rings. The prisoners assemble for breakfast. The air stirs with the mingled hopes and anxieties of people finding their footing in a world that will never again feel quite secure. The shock that filled the first meal becomes, as days layer into months, less a symptom of defeat and more a marker of endurance. Survival here has come to mean more than mere subsistence. It is the slow, often painful, discovery that the boundaries between self and other, between victor and vanquished, male and female, rule and exception, are far more porous than anyone could have imagined during the long years of war. Inside the camp's wire, the communal dining table reveals dozens of angles and stories, each layered atop another in the slow thaw between trauma and acceptance. For many Japanese women, the act of sharing a meal with strangers, especially men and foreign women, remains a private struggle, a wrenching challenge to every memory of discipline and home. There is frequent discussion, whispered at night in the bunks, sometimes written furtively in letters destined for uncertain recipients back in a devastated Japan. Some recall their childhoods, the strictness of ritual, the comfort of familiar gender boundaries, recalling the calm of a mother's kitchen, where daughters served quietly and men presided without question. Now these women watch Allied nurses and soldiers chat as equals, pass bread across the table, sometimes laugh at nothing in particular, and realize how strange and free these new forms can be. The shock for them is both psychological and social. To lose all boundaries at mealtime is to lose, at least in part, the compass by which shame, honor, and duty were measured. Some grieve in silence. A few refuse at first to participate, keeping to themselves, insisting on serving one another before ever accepting a spoonful from Allied hands. Others adapt more swiftly, drawn by hunger, curiosity, and a subtle desperation to belong even in exile. Gradually, the table becomes the epicenter of new conversations and routines. Small tokens, a slice of fruit, an extra cup of tea, are shared, and with each act, the icy separation between prisoner and warden, between woman and officer, melts into trust. For Allied staff, daily communal meals were not simply a logistical outgrowth of post-war necessity. Behind every tray, each seat assignment is the calculated intention to foster psychological recovery. American and Filipino nurses, experienced in both medicine and morale, strategically break ice by recalling bits of Japanese, learning family names, making space for prisoners to speak. The goal is less about discipline and more about transformation. A camp-fostered equality they hope will ease adaptation and diminish unrest. Observing the dynamics over weeks, administrators and doctors see marked changes. Fewer incidents, less depression, more engagement with camp life. The transition from silent eating to open conversation is slow but visible. Each meal is a battlefield won not by force but by patience and invitation. The psychological journey runs deep. Japanese prisoners battle waves of guilt and confusion, sometimes feeling betrayed by their own willingness to adapt, sometimes fearful that embracing new customs is an act of rebellion against the vanished empire. For those from strictly traditional backgrounds, meals mix pride with anxiety. Some older women quietly enforce ritual. Others become the first to cross lines, encouraging the younger prisoners to join Allied tables, asking questions, exploring new identities and possibilities. There are moments of grief, of arguments among the group, and even of hope as quieter women find the courage to speak up, to tell their story, or to accept the solidarity offered by a Filipino nurse who listens without judgment. Gender roles present a unique web of challenges and breakthroughs. Japanese women who believed deeply in separation and invisibility find themselves learning, day by day, to accept the confidence and camaraderie of Allied nurses and staff. Questions once unthinkable about work, love, and loss during the war are now traded openly. American and Filipino women share accounts of their own struggles, living through occupation, bombings, hunger. The prisoners, realizing that resilience and pain are not reserved for one side alone, begin to shift their own thinking about what it means to endure, and even to lead, in peace as in war. Leaders in both groups function as bridges. Camp commanders and Red Cross team leads set the tone, encouraging not just restraint, but the pursuit of dignity. In the barracks and around the tables, prisoners look to group elders for reassurance, but increasingly find themselves guided by the ordinary compassion shown by nurses and staff, whose authority is more emotional than martial. Those who once issued formal orders now participate in conversation, sometimes bowing first, sometimes smiling quietly as the youngest in their care giggles with a friendly camp medical orderly. The relationship between enemy and host alters with every shared meal. At first, Allied policy was wary and structured, intended to prevent chaos or violence. As adaptation progresses, however, the intent shifts. Routines become rituals of healing, opportunities for reconciliation rather than punishment. The simple, repeated act of breaking bread, of passing rice and trading stories, slowly reconstructs bonds that had been annihilated by propaganda and violence. In the evenings, when the camp quiets, nurses and volunteers often sit with Japanese prisoners outside the mess hall, sharing tea and listening as memories of home and war mix with dreams for the future. Sometimes tears are shed, for lost family, for pride surrendered, for peace realized only in fragments. But the remarkable truth of these scenes is their ordinariness. Survivors from both sides learning again to trust, to hope, to break bread with those who were once mere enemies or strangers. As more days pass, the initial tension of shared meals has faded almost entirely, replaced by a steady rhythm of coexistence and discovery within the camp's wire. The mess hall, once a crucible of uncertainty and cultural collision, settles into routine, its benches now bearing the familiar weight of prisoners and staff side by side. Each meal marks not only sustenance, but also a fresh opportunity for hesitant exchange, a question about family, a compliment on a borrowed phrase, a quiet commiseration over memories that still ache in the dusk. For the Japanese women, every new custom adopted is both a loss and a gain. Their letters, when permitted, speak of a world turned upside down, of the surprise and bittersweet novelty of eating with men and women together, of the humility required to ask for second helpings, of watching Filipino nurses and Allied volunteers laugh openly in a way that once would have been deemed improper. Cultural habits do not wither overnight. The urge to serve, to wait, to pause until elders have begun, remains a gentle backbone to their adaptation. But with each kind gesture received, a nurse quietly refilling rice, a chaplain bowing respectfully before joining the meal, layers of inherited shame and difference begin to dissolve. Transformation occurs not only within the hearts of the prisoners but within the Allied staff as well. Many entered the camp with wary professional distance, instructed to enforce separation while modeling restraint. Exposure to the quiet dignity, the fierce discipline, and the vulnerability of the Japanese women brings unexpected respect, even a sense of kinship. Nurses learn bits of Japanese, share their own hardships, and begin to see in their charges not the ghosts of an enemy, but echoes of common pain and the shared hope for dignity after disaster. Routine plays its silent, powerful part. Bread and rice measured out each morning, tables set, voices rising and falling, laughter returning after years denied. The women find solace in repetition, comfort in the dependable cycles of the day. There are moments, of course, when memory bites sharp, when news from a devastated home elicits tears, or when the murmur of a lullaby sung in their own tongue pulls old grief into the bright light of camp life. But these griefs are frequently shared, gently mirrored by the nurses who have suffered through invasion, loss of their own, or endless months spent waiting for peace. The camp's leadership, watching the subtle evolution, adjust their expectations and protocols. Where once guards stood stiffly at the periphery, now they are less visible, present to be sure, but only as needed. Conflict is rare, and when it appears, it is resolved not by force but patient mediation. Chaplains and Red Cross volunteers convene briefings for both staff and prisoners, reiterating the importance of shared humanity and respect, reminding all that these routines shape not just discipline, but the future of memory and reconciliation. Beyond the wire, the larger world stumbles in fits and starts toward rebuild and reckoning. News filters in about the Tokyo trials, about reforms and new elections, about the vast work required to repair lives and nations. Inside the camp, however, transformation is quieter, tailored to the daily needs of ordinary survivors coping with extraordinary change. The experience of eating together, at first so alien, now nearly natural, becomes for many Japanese women a reference point for life beyond the camp, a story to tell their families, a lesson learned at the edge of defeat. The routine of meals, begun in shock, concludes with the faint rhythm of trust. Across the table, hands pass bread or pour tea, and the eyes that once darted away now frequently linger in tentative, unguarded connection. The threat that seemed embodied in communal dining transforms into its opposite. The mess hall, a place built for efficiency and control, becomes the unlikely nursery of a new sense of self, resilient, adaptable, and just beginning to hope. In the months that follow, the subtle revolution begun at the breakfast table reaches into every corner of camp life. The mess hall's daily routine breeds habits of mutual support, small partnerships, and even friendships that would have seemed impossible in the immediate aftermath of surrender. Casual relationships, nurses and prisoners tending the infirmary together, Filipino staff and Japanese women organizing chores, help to diminish the isolation that once clung to every waking moment. The Japanese prisoners, once so marked by the impulse to resist assimilation, begin to take ownership of their new place in the camp's rhythm. Some volunteer for extra duties, eager to repay kindnesses received and to assert agency in a world defined less by command than by chance. When one of their group falls ill, it is both prisoners and staff who respond, mobilizing resources that transcend old divisions of nation and station. Within the barracks, informal leadership rises not from rank or age, but from the ability to listen, to comfort, to help others through spells of loneliness or the cycles of grief triggered by news from abroad. For the Americans and Allies, the slow transformation becomes a testament to camp policy and to the power of ordinary routine to heal. Records meticulously kept by Red Cross teams show marked improvement in health, mood, and social reintegration among prisoners exposed to communal dining and shared activities. Allied nurses detail in reports and remembrances how the simple act of passing the sugar or pouring a cup of tea generated more acceptance and trust than any formal speech or protocol ever could. As the occupation proceeds, leaders at headquarters begin to recognize the value of these routines for long-term reconciliation. Chaplains visit camps to collect testimonies, learning that those allowed to adapt socially and emotionally recover far faster than those kept only to work and discipline. Some commanders, reflecting on months spent among prisoners, write home about their changed perceptions, not of enmity and blame, but of shared loss and the possibility of new beginnings. The mess hall, both symbol and instrument of daily life, emerges as a kind of laboratory for post-war memory, a place where the tools of routine become the materials for hope. Regional trends follow similar patterns. In camps across the Pacific, reports filter in of Japanese prisoners, men and women, accepting the invitation to dine as equals, to serve and be served, to participate in small games and joint chores. The empathy forged in these spaces radiates outward, changing the tone of repatriation as prisoners return to rebuild shattered homes. Some Japanese women later recall these meals as quietly transformative, moments when survival and dignity were restored not by command, but by kindness and practical necessity. In the larger sweep of history, the statistical aftermath of communal camp routines is clear. Slower rates of depression, fewer incidents of violence or escape, marked improvement in group adjustment, increased willingness to engage with Allied staff, all documented and confirmed by independent observers. Even acts of resistance to routine, when they occur, are generally framed by debate and adjustment rather than outright hostility, a signal that new expectations are gradually supplanting old fears. The consequences ripple past the boundaries of role and routine. Some prisoners correspond with camp nurses long after the gates are opened, sending letters and photographs, sharing stories of family, work, and the continuing difficulty of reintegration. Allied staff, themselves changed by prolonged exposure to former enemies, take with them the wisdom gleaned from hundreds of quiet meals. The realization that the sharp lines of war can be softened and even erased by habit, humility, and the persistent reality of shared necessity. In the quiet hush that settles after the final meal, a sense of subtle closure and deep reflection overcomes the camp. The Japanese women who once entered as prisoners of war now sit in the fading afternoon, joined by nurses and staff with whom they have built small but meaningful bridges. Mutual respect, the language of uncomfortable transformation and ordinary kindness, endures in quiet gestures. A bow, a shared joke, a sympathetic touch of the hand. The mess hall, where the boundaries of custom and defeat collided, remains in memory as a place of tempering and renewal, a stage where both suffering and forgiveness were rehearsed through hundreds of repeated gestures. For many, these routines will echo long after camp gates open, and the world returns to its larger struggles and hopes. The Japanese women returning home bring with them stories of strange mornings, of men and women eating side by side, of dignity restored over shared bread and tea. In memory, these moments are not heroic nor dramatic, but quietly foundational, an anchor in the storm of post-war reintegration. Allied nurses retain similar echoes, indelible lessons about humility and the limits of command, about the possibility of peace found not through winning, but through the steady work of rebuilding and reconciliation. As history unfolds beyond the fences, the meaning of those meals, of shock, adaptation, and slow healing, remains a testament to the resilience of individuals and communities shaped by war. Day by day, morning by morning, routines did not only serve discipline, they shaped a new logic of hope. In the act of sharing food and conversation, the defeated and their hosts discovered a fragile but persistent truth, that amidst ruins, humanity is built as much from ordinary habit as from sweeping change. With every meal taken together, the deep wounds of war found unexpected spaces for repair, becoming the quiet seeds from which, in time, peace and understanding might grow.